Well, good morning, everybody. Here on Monday morning, we're watching the radar data, looking at kind of the end of a very busy weekend for some folks. We had a powerful system go up the East Coast, this nor'easter that kind of followed this stagnant front that was left lingering off the coast. It was a cold core system, which means it was not tropical in origin, and it certainly had well-defined fronts of its own. And this morning, we're still watching heavy precipitation move into parts of the Northeast here. There's a secondary low that had formed off of the Carolina coast on Sunday. You can see some of the heavier rain moving into South Carolina from that. Meanwhile, in the midsection of the country, there is a cold front sneaking through. It is delivering some rainfall. This is not kind of the big push over toward the much wetter time period, which we're going to be talking about here in just a few moments in the Midwestern United States. But that is linked up with the moisture that was still moving through parts of Arizona, New Mexico, in the Four Corners states after a weekend where we saw the repeated hits of moisture from two tropical systems, Priscilla and Raymond, and that created a lot of flooding here. Lastly, along the west coast, we have our next low that is kind of sliding north to south here, and you can see as it comes into kind of view here, just at the very end of this animation, some of the coastal rain that's coming into parts of Oregon and California. But over the weekend, the deeper low that's now moving through Canada that brought snow into the Canadian prairie also brought in some snow to the northern plains. So we're going to look at all of that, kind of figure out where this is going to go into the future and discuss an important thing I think we should all just remember about the flow of the atmosphere. So we're going to get into that in a second here. But I want to show you weekend precipitation totals. And again, this is liquid equivalent where there was snow. And you can kind of see all kind of four of those regions stacked up here that we've been paying attention to. If we zoom in quickly to the southwest, I do want to point out that Phoenix did set back-to-back records for rainfall this past weekend, and we can see that much of Arizona here delivered very, very heavy rain, some places picking up over 3 to 4 inches of rain. We saw a lot of flooding as a result of this. That moisture did move up into parts of the Colorado River Basin, too, as you can see here on this side of Colorado. Some very heavy precipitation for this time of year. Elsewhere in the southeast, take a look at South Carolina and the Carolina coast. Remember, this is an area that is in drought. And so to see this moisture come through, we're going to, really reverse those drought signals here pretty quickly, with a few places picking up well over 4 inches of rainfall. And one last place I want to show you a little more detail in is up the East Coast. It was important to note just how sharp of a finish, to the inward progression of that rainfall was over the weekend. It's not that we didn't get rain farther into the interior, but it certainly did not extend as far as some forecast models had suggested into Pennsylvania and New York with the heavier rainfall totals. But it is still raining this morning here in this part of New England, and we're going to keep an eye on just how much they do get, given that this is one of our areas that is deep into drought, especially the farther north you go toward Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Snow-wise, just want to give you the last update here on where this weekend kind of took us. And you can see here that we added up pretty significant snows here in the Rockies and some in the Cascades. But I've got more coming for the Sierra Nevada and the Rockies and the Cascades with this upcoming forecast. So here we go. If you have a look at this morning's wind field, all right, we can find these things. Here's the secondary low, the main low, a part of the nor'easter here. We can see the low that's kind of sneaking along the coast. And there's our frontal boundary that's attached ultimately to this deeper low that's moving through parts of Canada eventually toward the Hudson Bay with some snow on its backside. Now, we know that behind this front, temperatures did drop off. I mean, we're looking at a temperature drop off here, 25 degrees, and that has prompted these freeze and frost advisories. And with the next trough coming in, as I mentioned, there's still more snow coming into the Rockies. There's snow coming into the Sierra Nevadas where we have these winter storm warnings. And we have winter weather advisories out for the Cascades as well. And we're still under broad flood watches across parts of the Southwest because of the continual stream of moisture that's coming through there and the low that's sitting just off the California coast. All right, with that as a kind of a quick hit on where we are, I want to show you something that I think is important to understand about the narrative Matt and I carried all of last week. Okay, and it's going to be about the differences between summer flow and now fall and winter flow. So I'm going to show you July. Now, in the month of July, we were extremely dry throughout this part of the Southwest, all right? And Arizona, the rainfall that you just got, it would have been much better distributed over July and August than getting it all now at this point in October. We had the tremendous flooding that hit this part of Texas. Again, the moisture from that coming through the Caribbean just hammering this area for about 2 weeks before the rainfall unleashed. But there's a corridor in through here that was very stormy. I'm talking about this corridor right in through here. Now, we were missing some of the moisture into the parts of the delta and the southeast at times in the month of July. And it was still the beginning of the drought in the northeast. But what I want to do is I want to show you what the pattern was doing and how it's changing by contrasting summer versus fall. So this is what the July pattern did. We saw 3 ridges, 1, 2, and 3. So the jet goes over the top there, and has to go over the top here. And in between, where it comes out of the northwest, like it does here in the central part of North America, it can meet flow coming from the Caribbean and Gulf to produce thunderstorms. So when this area goes into drought, I'm talking about the midsection of the country, the Mississippi Basin, this ridge has to be here. And this ridge can't linger along the west coast of North America. That just cannot happen, because what you end up getting out of it is flow like this. So I just went back. I just round the clock back to July 13th and take a look. There's one ridge here. There's the second ridge there. And in between, the flow is coming in this direction. Now, northwest flow in summer is the only time of year that produces a lot of wet weather in this corridor. In fact, it can even extend all the way to the Carolinas with the way these thunderstorms progress. But that northwest flow is in North America, a uniquely summertime precipitation mode. And the reason for that is what's going on underneath it. You see, if you look down at the low levels of the atmosphere, we saw the Bermuda High living right in through here. So flow came through the Caribbean into the Gulf, and it just kept dumping lots and lots and lots of moisture into this area. And you can see it when you look back at July's precipitable water. These warmer colors represent above average precipitable water rates, while the Southwest was so dry because the Pacific High sat like this. Now, what's my point here? My point is simply this, that all that moisture, as it got pumped into the east, kept the temperatures very, very hot. This is average temperature ranks. Most of this was with hot overnight lows, but there were also very warm days. And then if you look, there's this corridor in through here that saw near normal to below normal temperatures. Now, we were cold along the California coast because of the marine stratocumulus layer. But if you look into the interior of the West, there's a lot of regions that were having a normal to hotter than normal summer. Now, what are we doing here? What you're noticing is we had heat, I'll just put an H there, and heat here and here. And that's what helps drive patterns that do that, okay? They kind of bounce over the heat. In fact, the reason why the jet stream flows in the direction that I'm showing you in these 2 arrows is because of the lower level temperatures. Now, long story short, when we look at all of this, that's where we're going. And do you see the difference? We're now seeing a lot of heat here, and it's much cooler there. So instead of the jet going over the top and diving, which is what it has been doing since August, making it very, very dry in late summer and fall here, the jet's about ready to flip around and do that. We call that southwest flow. And if it is fall, winter, or spring, and I'm talking about southwest flow, the narrative is going to be we're opening the Gulf for moisture transport. We are bringing troughs over the western U.S. mountains, which tends to invigorate and stir them up once they get over the mountains on the lee side to develop new, low pressure systems. And they, in turn, draw their own flow. It kind of comes around like this, pulling moisture from the Gulf and contrasting it with colder air to the north. So here's the long story short. In summer, if you live in this area, let's just do that. In summer, you want heat in the west. You're going, why? Well, the jet comes over the top and dives, and the moisture from the Gulf hits it, and it storms like mad. If you want moisture here in the fall, winter, and spring, you want it cold in the west. So the jet goes underneath it and ejects, creating low pressure systems that pull the moisture in. That's your difference between your summer and the rest of the year. Now, I know I just picked on the Midwest as an example, but don't forget these storm systems move east, which means usually whatever forms here evolves farther to the east, unless you're talking about what's called a Miller A storm, which goes along the Gulf Coast and then up the East Coast. But the Miller Bs, the ones that come across here, I'm just using the Miller classification, by the way, they originate in the midsection of the country. Now in the west, we don't anticipate much rainfall in the summer except for the monsoonal storms, right? Okay. So once we talk about the western weather, it's all about the 6 months starting in October, or the 7 months starting in October and ending in April. And that is always going to be about where there's high pressure. Does it live here and split flow like that? Is it the worst case scenario where it lives along the west and splits flow like this? Or is it something where the high pressure lingers over here and the jet comes in from two angles and we just continually bombard the west with moisture? But what I keep drawing over here is just to show you this is different. This doesn't mean that we're going into some radically different pattern that's going to just rip things apart. No, it's just we finally built in some cooler weather to the west. And it's sparked by this. What did we talk about last week? We talked about Siberian snow. We talked about the high pressure pushing up against the mountains. We talked about the fact that there's a now thermal contrast, hotter south, cooler north, and because of the Coriolis effect, the wind gets turned and it comes across the Pacific Ocean like that. And it's eventually going to affect the flow through the Gulf of Alaska and what's going to happen in the United States. This may not be for another, 10 plus days that it does this. But we're finally starting to get, away from these big blocky ridges. Now look, there's Omega. See it? There's the trough that ejected. It made it out this weekend. That's the snowmaker. And here's the low pressure that's still sitting off the southeast coast, which was associated with this weekend's nor'easter, and the secondary low from the trough that followed it here. Watch this. As I play it forward, we're still blocky through this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but watch. That little trough is going to try to eject. It's making it through the ridge by Friday, October 17th. And this is legit. I mean, there will be a front here with cold air on the backside, and that's going to push through, bringing rain into this area. And we're no longer, look at the flow. See how it's more zonal now? We're no longer just big ridges with troughs to the south. And what it shows in the pattern is that by, this upcoming weekend, we're actually moving troughs across the country. And what's amazing about this is that high pressure will naturally begin to form in this area. This doesn't mean the Bermuda high is coming back, it just means high pressure starts to form here as deep troughs of low pressure come through, and that opens up the Gulf, and that is what might increase the risk of some severe weather. And today, it's all starting right there. That's it. That's the jet extension we talked about all last week. That's what's coming off of Siberia. And what it's going to knock out is all of this business, this really meridional north-south flow. It's a part of the buildup of momentum that we watch the models predict going back toward normal. And that buildup of momentum, is bringing the global wind oscillation out of the basement back up toward average. So the point here is that we're getting away from this super stagnant late summer, early fall weather pattern. We're starting to see flow again. So take a look. Now, I know I got to get you reoriented here because I make my map centered on the prime meridian, but have a look right here. Okay, that's the jet extension. It continues over to this side. And as you play it forward, we're knocking out, look at that. We're knocking out those big ridges. So what I end up seeing is that by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, look, there is actually southwest flow coming into the atmosphere here. And the west is cool. We're bringing in that southwest flow. This is going to open up underneath that ridge, moisture transport out of the Gulf, and things are going to go. We're going to start to see this weekend a system roll through the midsection of the country. And look at these beautiful waves following it. That is what I've missed seeing in the flow. And look at this one. Now, this is out there about 8 days or so. Yeah, we've got a really well-established trough coming over the Rockies with an antecedent or a preceding ridge in the flow. So this is the buildup of heat. The trough comes over, taps into that instability. I think we're going to be getting into a pretty active time period as we go forward. Look at these waves. This is the GFS. Okay, look at that. All right, net effect. This is the chance over the next 10 days of getting an inch. And what we are now seeing is that as systems come into the west, look at the probabilities increase for the west. We start to see a dry slot open. That is a consequence of having flow coming out of the west. But as these systems develop, we have such a large area here where the probabilities are starting to increase. Now, across the southeast, where we have been in drought, except for the recent rains that have come up the coast, we do know that because of high pressure resulting in the formation of these low pressure systems here, high pressure forms there, this area tends to be a bit drier. But look at that. That is different. That is moisture getting in one of the driest spots in the country in terms of soil moisture. See it? Look right in through here around the Great Lakes Basin and how dry it's been. Now, my concern is we stay drier here, and we're going to have to watch what we can get in terms of moisture and storms into Texas and Oklahoma and the southern plains. But there is something important to note about this. When we look historically at the average count of daily severe weather reports, we come out of winter and then we hit this spring rapid increase. And then it kind of falls off a little bit here in late summer, all right? But there's often a secondary peak that occurs, not a peak, but a little bit of a ramp up that can take place in September, October, November. Some years it's early, some years it's late. Now this year we're at 1,500 tornado reports, average is 1,257 to this point. If you're curious on hail, we are below the trend line on hail. Okay, so 6,070, we're 5,303. But wind reports, we are way above it. And unfortunately, their box kind of hides the value, but it's somewhere around 13,000. We're at 16,497. But there's almost always a little secondary push of severe weather here. And as that pattern evolves, take a look. The Storm Prediction Center this morning is putting out there next Saturday the chance for some severe storms. And if I come out here and show it to you, there it is, day 6 in the pattern. They're watching this here. So what are we seeing? Trough come over, Gulf opening, destabilization, tons of wind shear, and we start to watch this region for the risk of severe storms. You can see it another way. If I go back and show you, I mentioned these high pressure cells are being created as a reflection of the lows coming off of the mountains. It's not the Bermuda High. Watch. As I play this out, where's the Bermuda High? It's still way over here. In fact, this next tropical system, okay, right there, we'll talk about that in a second, still curls around it. Now, it's being aided by the fact there are deeper lows in the North Atlantic bringing their flow through like this. But still, the Bermuda High is not returned. Yet by Friday, October 17th, look, see the higher pressure here? Now you start to see, look at the wind barbs. See how it's opening up the transport of moisture into what seems to be, by Saturday, a relatively vigorous low-level jet. So the high pressure here pumping in the moisture, and that's the guy we're going to watch out as we look out there at day 6. Now, I think it's more than that. When we get out there maybe to day 8 or 9 or 10, the ECMWF, now we're way out there in the forecast, but look, another area of high pressure, Gulf opened. That is a much stronger low-level wind that's ripping through this area. And that's why I think we have these chances of developing quite vigorous lows that come off the Rocky Mountains. And that's going to have to be watched. Now, there's something else that's interesting on this. At the very end of the new European model run, something is brewing here. So we better talk a bit about the tropics. Because right now we have Lorenzo, which is formed and out to open ocean. In fact, let's just zoom in on the North Atlantic there. There's Lorenzo. And it's getting curled around the very eastward displaced Bermuda High. But if you have a look right now, watch this wave right in through here. You can see that over the next 10 days, instead of getting pulled north, this next tropical wave leaving Africa may get into the Caribbean, and maybe a very late October development in the Caribbean that could get into the Gulf. We're just going to have to watch it. That's all I know about it today. I can't make up more of a story than what you're seeing in the current forecast models, but we'll keep an eye on that particular setup. All right, back to the near term. So we now know what we're looking for and understand it. We do have the frost and freeze issues, the winter storm stuff going on in the west. Let's take a look now at what to expect over the next 10 days or so. All right, one system's going up through the Hudson. This is the moisture remnant of Priscilla and Raymond. There's our cutoff low, and our nor'easter is still here as we work through the day today, getting into early tomorrow morning. We do know that moisture kind of works its way, there it is, into the north central United States, and the trough that was lingering off the coast finally moves into this area. So we're going to be looking for some midweek to late week moisture getting out of the Rockies here into the northern plains. If you're to the south of this, it's going to be very windy. If you're in it, it's going to be windy. And we're going to be watching a major buildup of heat here because the flow is doing this. Like that and like that. So there's a high sitting over here. It's actually connected way up to that area and the deeper low in that area. So this is Thursday. Now watch. Friday into Saturday. This is where the Storm Prediction Center is getting a good look at the risk of this severe weather into this area. It's just saying, hey, we're going to watch it because there's going to be a high over the southeast now, pumping in moisture. It's going to destabilize, and that's going to be a rigorous front. That's going to be a real front coming through the Great Lakes, Midwest, all the way down to the Mid-South, even into Texas. And that's just the beginning of this change. Notice after that, look at the low both models have. See it? A week from now, next Sunday night, coming into the west. And as one system exits east, the next one begins to form to the west. It's a lee cyclone. There it is. Look at this thing. Very windy, deep low, frontal boundary here. This is the stronger of the two systems I'm currently thinking about, and that's next Wednesday, and that one's going to go through. So the net effect of all of this is to really crank things up, and it's cold enough in the west to really add in some snow. This is just through Friday. More Rocky Mountain snow, the cutoff low that's lingering off the coast as it comes through, bringing in snow into the Sierra Nevada. And this, of course, is from the system moving through right now. But as we play it out, those western troughs live, and you can see quite a bit of snow getting added up here into the Rockies. Now, where are we a week from now? You saw this earlier in the operational European model, but look at this. Trough, trough, trough. We're getting westerly flow back into the system. And once we get out there again, because now instead of it being 300 hours out, it's only 220, 250. That's your jet extension getting into the North Pacific, into the Gulf of Alaska. And all I can tell you is that when I get up there toward the end of the month, there's a whole lot more zonal flow to this than there has been in a very long time. So that just tends to wake the pattern up. And we're going to watch these deep lows that form in the Bering Sea very carefully, as they could be an indicator of the way the flow is going to go across the United States much later into the month of October. Now, you look at the models, let's blow this up just a hair, and you're going, all right, yeah, they're not really showing like just huge rainfall events across the country. I understand that. But they're also not showing just massive areas of super dry weather like they've shown for weeks. There's a return, there's moisture coming back, and that's why all the week 2 forecast continue to show up with some, with something, okay? We're going to monitor these week 2 forecasts carefully this week. All right, I want to mention something about the winds. We had a very windy weekend throughout the plains. With the system coming through here, it is Thursday into Friday. Take note that the winds are going to build back up in the plains yet again. And as we watch the next few systems come through, they're each going to be able to start to crank on these winds in the midsection of the country. 30, 40, 50 mile an hour gusts. Will be windy off the coast. This is from the current nor'easter. These are from the deeper lows coming into the west, but we need to prepare for the fact that November begins to pick back up on our winds after the summer lull because of the lack of a good temperature distribution. So speaking of temperatures, here's our frost risk map. And again, see that dip in the west? That's what we're watching for, okay? Frost over the next 7 days. Let's have a look at the high temperatures. Still very cold out west. It's going to stay that way through Tuesday into Wednesday. But the buildup of the heat in the midsection of the country ahead of the front later this week, there it is, that front's going to sit right in through here by Friday. Once we work our way into Saturday, it starts to move east, and that's where we're going to be paying attention to the risk of the strong to severe storms in this area. On the heat and instability, the front sweeping through, and by the time we get into Sunday, it starts to knock these temperatures back. Okay? Bigger picture. I don't think the models, when looked at in ensemble mode, are going to capture the variability in temperatures. I mean, you just saw. I mean, look how much things just change over a short amount of time as I go back and forth on the next week's temperatures, right? They're going to bounce quite a bit more than we're used to from this past summer. But by day 10, we're still locked into that pattern of cool west, warm east. And that's what's just going to keep this thing alive. At some point, as we approach the third week of October, there will be a sizable push of cold air that's going to follow one of these things and set up residence for a few days. And the models are not going to be able to see that when looked at in ensemble mode because there's too much uncertainty on it. But I would just say that watch the end of October. It could be much more lively with temperature change because that's climatologically what happens. Okay, let's get to the end of this. This is the newest day 8 through 14 outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. They are talking about the risk of heavier snows in the Rockies. Winds, you can also see that they're on the lookout for stronger winds coming off the plains and off the Rockies getting out there. But what I wanted to show you was their new outlook for temperature and precipitation for the last week of October, first week of November. Now, we're still mild overall here, okay? And that's simply because, what I would imagine is they're taking the current pattern, which is driving a lot of cold air into the west, opening up warm air here. But what you're going to notice when you look at your temperature forecast is they're going to go up and then they're going to come down. They're going to go up and they're going to come down. So there may just be, on average, more warmth in the pattern than there is cool based upon this. They are still drier in the southern plains, okay? And I believe this is mainly from the fact that if you get systems ejecting, they may not make their full pull on moisture till you get closer to the Mississippi. So this area tends to see better moisture while we tend to be drier into parts of Texas. But I'm going to just put this back out there. I cannot rule out that something may come of this that may 10, 12 days from now, be in the Caribbean through the Gulf and maybe get into this part of Texas, which has been, so very dry. Sorry, I jumped way too far ahead there. Let's come back to this. There we go. There we go. But, this is pretty consistent with some of our longer term models as well. Speaking of which, here's the new European outlook for the 15th of October through the 15th of November. And you can clearly see we're still drier here, but there's flow moving across this part of the country into Canada according to the European model. All right. Now, I want to remind you again, because we didn't get any new long-range data this weekend, but here are the November, December, January outlooks from the on the left, the NMME, and on the right, the European model. And you could say there's some decent similarities between the two on what they're picking up on. They come much more into alignment once you get into January, February, March, which is calling for a very active, region in through here, with the driest region potentially being the southeast, although I wouldn't bank on this based on the way the flow is setting up right now. But this is the overall forecast they've got. And I wouldn't even bank on the dryness in California. I think we're going to get times this winter where California brings in really good, decent flow, and it's not as dry as projected here by some of the models. These models are hung up on what's going on with La Nina. I'll just be honest with you. They're all La Nina-esque in their predictions here. And if we have just a quick look at what's going on with all the La Nina predictions, they're all down here. I put them all lined up for you. We're at, 0.9 C below average, which is La Nina. But the question is, how long does this, does this last? And let's try that again. Let's just open the image. There we go. There it is. If you have a look at the forecast that was just put out by NOAA on the 9th, they're just like every other model trying to kill this La Nina by the time we get past Christmas. And the possibility of having an El Nino build quickly is in the cards. I mean, I don't know if you saw it when you're looking at those other maps, but notice, take a look at the GFS. Oh, the GFS. This is the European model. Okay, if I take you back, let's go here. There we go. That's the newest forecast. Look how quickly that brings this back by February, March, and April to INSO neutral conditions. All right. Okay, so with all of the flubs there in my vocab, let's now get to the inline here. This is what we saw over the weekend in South America. There was some stormy activity in the south, some monsoonal storms here, but overall this is not the widespread coverage that we can expect. I was very wrong on this. I anticipated them making much more progress, staying at the top end of this distribution, being closer to 30% planted in Mato Grosso. The new data came out and they are way down here at 21.2%. Now, I say way down in comparison to where I thought they were going to be. We're about 4% off of 4% higher, than the the historical average right now, but still I thought it was going to be much higher. As we look forward at the forecast, the next 10 days, the models are still split. That's the European. That is the GFS. The GFS is the drier of the two models in this core growing area here. But there is something important to note about the new European forecast. Into week 2, it picks up on a much drier forecast into this area, which is why when you look out over the next 2 weeks, see how it's starting to pull into some drier conditions. Drier, not dry. And the GFS, if I just take you out there to week 2, and then show you the 2-week forecast, it's still the much more aggressive model on being dry throughout Mato Grosso. But it certainly means that this monsoon is coming in fits and starts, and November rains are going to be critical for Brazil overall here. We've got a story developing that I think needs to be watched carefully, because if this Friday's report continues to show a slowing in the planting progress, I imagine that means that the germination of some of this early planted stuff for soybeans here is probably not good, and they're probably going to have to replant some of this. But that's common. That happens every year. We just need to watch it. There's one last thing I want to show you, and it's a global look at the next 10 days. And one of the bigger things that I'm going to be watching is right here. This is where we're seeing a lot of tropical type thunderstorm and tropical cyclone activity over the next 10 days. And the question will be, is this where we're just going to anchor the MJO, or is it finally going to make its way east with time? I haven't shown you the MJO in months because it's been just stuck. It's not been a dominant factor. The other piece is this. We're watching tropical systems. There's one here now doing this. They could also enhance that flow coming across the North Pacific. So that's what's on my mind. Thought about it a lot this weekend. Now you can see where we're going to take things this week. Matt will pick it up tomorrow morning, and we'll just talk again soon. Appreciate your time, everybody. Thanks.